Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. My name's Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week we're going to be talking about some Nintendo. But before you get all thinking about this is a Nintendo video game podcast, it's not a video game podcast. It's Nintendo before video games. That's crazy, Mike. Tell me about Nintendo before video games.
Yeah, so we're talking the origins of Nintendo today. The year is 1889. This might be the farthest back we've gone. Although
yeah,
when
this is very far back.
We talked about Bagatelle. That was pretty far back though too.
That's true. Bagatelle goes way back.
Yeah, Bagatelle goes way back. My primary source for this episode is a book called The History of Nintendo, 1889 to 1980, From Playing Cards to Game & Watch. And it is by Florent Gorges. I believe it's pronounced Gorges. It's Gorges. And it's a book that was written in French and translated to English. And because of that, there's some weird grammar things going on here, but I did my best. Okay. This is me telling everyone before we start, I did my best. Couple things up top. I have allergies right now. I've really been hitting the gamut of like weird health things lately, but I'm doing fine. But if I make any disgusting noises, I'll try not to, is my point. But if I do, forgive me. Okay. The second thing about this too is I have to give a big shout out to Matt in Japan because he's been going back and forth with me on Discord about how to do some of the pronunciation of these Japanese names. Now, I didn't get to talk to him about all the names, so I'm sure I'm going to screw up. So essentially, if I get it right, that's because of Matt. If I get it wrong, it's entirely my fault. I just want everyone to know that before we get started.
That's good. Thank you, Matt in Japan. Really appreciate your input.
Yeah, but and let me know what you think about this as a listener if you want us to keep talking about this book, because I plan on doing more episodes using this book, mostly because it's out of print and it was extremely expensive when I bought it. But
we got to make it worthwhile.
Exactly. We got to get our money's worth out of this. But they talk about some pretty cool stuff like Nintendo did, like their light gun technology toys. At one point, they made propaganda board games and cards for World War II. And they even made like off-brand Lego bricks at one point, which, got me all excited because I'm a Lego person. But yeah, so in order to get started about this and like understand the early days of Nintendo, if we want to get going, we have to have a little crash course on the history of playing cards in Japan. So playing cards are introduced to Japan through their first contacts with peoples of Europe, mostly from Portuguese sailors, but not all from Portuguese sailors, all right? And this took place in the Muromachi era in the mid to late 1500s. That's when cards started kind of showing up. And
so we're going way back.
We are going way back, really, because Nintendo starts in 1889, but we're going really far back. So the games sailors played were called Carta, Carta, which then translated into Japanese became Karuta, Karuta. And these games pretty much took off straight away in Japan and became very popular among Japanese aristocrats. Local variants began to appear around this time as well. So we're going to talk about it at length, but before we get going, I just also want to mention like what is Hanafuda, because that is the card that Nintendo made. They're called Hanafuda cards. They are a type of card. It is not a card game. Just so we clear that up right away.
This is the equivalent of like a bicycle pack of cards, right? Like that.
Yes.
That you can play many games with a pack of cards. There is no one game that you would just say, let's play cards, right? Like there are many, many, many games.
Exactly. And the main games that I found, the big one's called Koi Koi, and I tried to learn it for this podcast. And full disclosure, it hurt my brain because the thing about Hanafuda cards is there are no symbols, there are no numbers. They are just pictures that represent seasons and months of the year. And we're going to kind of get into that in a bit, but I'll just keep explaining, Tyler. And if you have any questions pop up, because maybe you can be like the listener in this sense and let me know what you think.
I have no idea.
So all is great with these Portuguese sailors exchanging their cards. And there's like an exchange of culture and a learning going on, right? Up until, and if you're familiar with Japanese history, you might also be aware of this. It's called the Edo era of the 17th century. Now, this is not a Japanese history podcast, and I am by no means an expert on Japanese history. So I am going to TLDR this one essentially. But from 1603 to around 1868, Japan went into a time of isolation from the world. The only countries they really had contact with were China, Korea, and the Netherlands. And this is also a time of the extermination of Japanese Christians and an overall ban on Western culture. So this is a very
Okay.
dark time for Japan. We're only talking about it in the context of there was no card exchanging, and it does matter because of what happens after that. So the story begins of what we now know as like Hanafuda cards, and the numbers were removed and they were replaced by the 12 months of the year, because the reason Hanafuda cards came into existence is so people could play them and gamble without being caught. It was kind of like a secret way of gambling. So 12 months of the
Okay.
year, 4 seasons, so the deck has 48 cards. Hanafuda means flower cards, and most of the depictions of the seasons on the cards are represented by flowers. Okay.
Okay.
And the cards were mostly used for gambling during this period. It didn't really fool anyone in the Japanese government at the time. And once again, they were banned.
So just Hanafuda cards in general banned. If you had a pack of Hanafuda cards, not okay.
Not okay. Yep. And these restrictions on these cards did not really stop until 1885. And then 4 years later, in 1889, a 30-year-old Japanese craftsman and avid player of Hanafuda named Fusajiro Yamauchi decided to start a company.
I recognize that name.
Yeah. And Fusajiro Yamauchi actually trained in making games as an artisan. Like, this used to be when you made cards, it was a craft. It was kind of like it was like masonry. You were a
Okay.
craftsman when you made these artisanal goods. And he actually trained in making games as an artisan for other companies before he decided to go independent and strike it out on his own. Therefore, we can conclude, I think, it's safe to say, Nintendo is an indie game company. I think,
Okay.
right?
I'm here. I'm here for it.
I
Indie
think we can
game,
say it started.
small indie company.
Small indie company, Nintendo. He built a small wooden stand in the Ohashi area of Kyoto. And I'm blown away by like the actual documentation of this, because they actually have the date the shop opened,
Wow.
which is kind of nuts when you think about how old this was.
Yeah.
It officially opened on September 23rd, 1889. We know that for a fact. And according to a map of Kyoto, at the time of the shop, it was named Yamauchi Nintendo. That was the name of the company.
Okay.
Nintendo wouldn't actually have the name Nintendo until 1933. So,
And the name Nintendo actually like sort of is relevant to playing cards, right? Because it's leave luck to heaven.
yeah,
So playing
that's
cards, gambling, luck, it all makes sense.
perfect segue, because the next section of my notes in my script here is called the name. Okay, we're going to take a brief aside to talk about the name Nintendo, because it turns out there are other ways to think of it now. So, to many, and what I heard before reading this book, and I imagine what most of our listeners heard, is the name Nintendo translates to, quote, to leave one's fortune in the hands of fate. Like you said, very gambling focused, right? It
Yeah.
sounds like gambling. Now, Gorget puts out a different reasoning using some alternate translations and meanings of the three syllables nin, ten, and do. We could translate the meaning of Nintendo to actually mean, quote, the temple of free Hanafuda, or, quote, the company that is allowed to make or sell Hanafuda. So
What?
there's multiple translations. It could just straight up mean I'm allowed to sell cards now, is what Nintendo means.
That's the name. Like, just imagine that's the sign above the shop. Like, hey, we can sell cards now. It's legal. Let's
Yeah,
go. I
yeah,
feel like
like
there are like weed shops here named that.
yeah, right. It sounds very like similar to this, like it's legal now kind of thing. And okay, I'm actually like I say Gorget because there's an accent on the S. Of course, we don't have a Discord user that knows French that I could talk to about this. But I also heard Gorge. I'm going to say Gorget. I'm going to stick to Gorget. Okay.
Okay.
Uh,
What? I have a question before we move on. So we
yeah,
have the Temple of Free Hanafuda, or the company that is allowed to make or sell Hanafuda, but I feel like we're missing a translation of Hanafuda. Is there a translation there of what Hanafuda means?
it's flower card
Okay.
essentially. It's
Okay.
flowers. Yeah. Yeah,
Gotcha.
essentially. And there's also the next part of this too is we actually, and Gorget admits this, there's no way to validate these alternate translations. This is just kind of a fun possibility I'm sharing with everyone. And
Hmm.
maybe a cool little bar side chat. If you ever talk to someone about it, you can bring this up and seem like you're a person
This is
of the world, I guess,
this
that
is
knows.
the Scott Pilgrim like Pac-Man thing where he's like Pac-Man actually means Paku Paku.
Yeah, it's exactly that kind of
Puckman.
thing. And the
Yeah.
fun part about this is Hiroshi Yamauchi admits that he doesn't even know for sure. And we as a collective group just kind of go with the first definition, the official Nintendo definition, which is to leave one's fortune in the hands of fate. But now let's get back to making Hanafuda cards because Yamauchi made these cards by hand with a few. In the book, they say young employees, and I'm just going to throw out that probably means children, just knowing how the world worked. But it's we're just speculating, but it's the 1800s, so probably children. Now, I'm going to read a brief passage from the book on how these cards are made, just to show you how intense this process is. So, quote, manufacturing Hanafuda cards was much more complicated than it seems. Even if the cards were small, 3 by 3 by 5 by 4 centimeters, they were nevertheless quite thick because of several layers of clay, wood, and paper. There weren't any machines capable of carrying out such complex tasks at the time. Thus, all cards had to be handmade one by one.
Dang.
Yet, illustrating and coloring were made by printing panels engraved in wood. Color, rendering, and bark thickness weren't always perfect, giving uneven quality to the finished product. Only the best were kept for sale, the others being destroyed. End quote. So you could make a whole batch of
Okay.
these cards and they don't come up to like your standards and you just throw them away.
So you weren't kidding when you were like this was a crafts person thing. Like if you made Hanafuda cards, like that was a craft or even an art form, right? These things don't just roll off of, or didn't at the time, didn't just roll off of like the assembly line, like machines making these things all perfectly. Like it was, you had to be good. This was a skill that you could be good at, right? Or
Yeah,
bad at.
exactly. It's a skill. It would be the equivalent of today hand making these cards and selling them on Etsy, I feel like,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the
Okay.
equivalent of modern day Hanafuda. They also were made from blackberry bush bark. I don't think I put that in here, but that was another little fun fact of like where they actually get the wood and
Hmm.
the bark to make it. So, as you can see, though, it's no easy task to make these cards. So, let's talk about Nintendo's first card games. They were called Daitorio, which means president in English. And they were said to be sturdy and pleasant to use. But here's the fun part: the president cards had a picture of Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte on them.
Okay.
Which begs the question, why were these called president cards? Well, and this is actually like the historical reasoning that historians say is they think Fujisaro Yamauchi confused Napoleon Bonaparte with the US President George Washington. And that's why they're like this. Which
Love
I
it.
hope that's true. I hope it's
Ah,
true.
these white guys all look the same, man.
Honestly, you kind of look at I bought a pack of these cards like from Nintendo. I have a pack of Nintendo Hanafuda cards. And I'm holding the box right now they came in. And it's really cool because on the back of the box, it actually shows you the cards that I'm going to talk about, like the faces of these. So I see the Daitorio president, the Napoleon Bonaparte photo on the back of mine. And there's another one we're going to talk about in a
Does it
second.
look like George Washington?
It looks very much like Napoleon Bonaparte. It is not
Okay.
George
Well,
Washington at all.
all right.
What's funny though is these cards, by the way, I say that like it's a rare thing. You can get these cards on Amazon, like official Nintendo cards for like $14. So if you're interested in this, go ahead and
Nintendo still makes Hanafuda
they
cards that are like
still make
official
Hanafuda
Nintendo.
cards,
Oh
official
wow,
Nintendo. It says
that's
copyright
cool.
Nintendo on the box. And the cards are much smaller than I thought they would be. They're actually kind of closer to the size of a domino. And
Oh, oh
they
wow, that's very small. Okay.
the art is beautiful on them, but they're again, the reason I'm bad at this, listener, I'm gonna direct this to listener. We don't do this often, listeners. The reason I am bad at Hanafuda cards is I am color deficient and terrible at seeing differences in colors and stuff. And most of these games involve matching, and it's not an easy
Mm.
task for me. So I bought the cards because I think they look cool. I don't think I'm going to become a professional Koi Koi player is what I'm trying to tell everybody
Oh
on this
man.
podcast. The other game that was created by Nintendo in the early days was called I should have asked Matt about the translation of this. Hakunin Ishu, which roughly translates to 100 people, one poem. And this game sounds really cool. It combined poetry, memory, and like quick reflexes. So you had to like grab cards and make poetry, it sounds like, out of them.
Hmm, that sounds
And
fun.
yeah, both these games were really popular. But the big issue in Japan is it selling these cards at this time in 1889, and like I guess you could say up to the early 1900s too, is scale, because once people in Kyoto owned a deck of Nintendo cards, they rarely replaced them unless they became worn out. So what ended up happening is all of Nintendo's sales surged at first as everyone was buying these cards. But then once everyone that played cards had a deck, their sales dropped because they already owned a pair and they don't go
Okay.
through them that fast.
What a problem to have. Sir, everyone in the country has bought your product. You can no longer sell more of them. What are we going to do? Literally everyone has this already.
Yeah, I should also mention it is not the country, by the way. That's an important note because we're going to come up to that in a bit. The This is people in this area in Kyoto and
Oh,
Osaka
okay. So a smaller
specifically.
area of Japan.
Yes, and we're going to talk
Gotcha.
about why that is in a bit. But now Fujisaru Yamauchi has to make a plan. Like, how am I going to bring my sales back? And his solution was one of his solutions. The first one was to sell a wide range of cards at varying prices. So now instead of throwing away the bad cards, like I mentioned before, that were not up to the standards of Nintendo, he made a new line of cards called Tengu. And Tengu actually has some significance in Japanese culture because at the time, that is not only the name of the legendary, like red-nosed Japanese character. You may have seen a picture of Tengu before. If you Google it, you'll be like, oh, I recognize that. It was also the password used in many gambling halls during the repressive reign of the Tokugawas in the Edo period that I mentioned before. Like if
Oh.
you wanted to gamble, you could sometimes like go up to the door and say Tengu. And they even mentioned you could like point to your nose as like a symbol that you wanted to play cards.
Ah.
Because the flower and nose in Japanese are both pronounced hana, like the same pronunciation. So you could like
Oh.
mix them up. And so you would sometimes just go up to people and like touch your nose and they knew you wanted to play cards. So there's kind of like a gambling history to this line of cards too, which I thought was
I feel
pretty
like
cool.
that's like a weird thing in I want to say American culture just because that's like the culture that I know obviously, but maybe it goes beyond that, but like where people will touch their nose to like signify that they know a secret or something like that. Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Does this make sense to
Yeah,
you?
yeah.
Like
Like I got like nose
I
go
get
like
like
I know what you're
yeah, like I
saying.
know what you're
Yeah.
saying. They point to their nose, right? Like I get what. So I don't know if this is related, but
I
it
wonder.
feels
That's
related
interesting.
conceptually at least.
Yeah, language, like the etymology of a
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, that's cool. I never thought about that. Yeah, so that was the first thing that Yamauchi did to sell these cards, right? To start selling the cheaper ones and putting different designs on it, essentially branching out and making more product. The real success though didn't come from this broadening of prices and selling the poorer cards. What made Nintendo a powerhouse in Hanafuda cards was Yamauchi's business sense to market to the newly opened gambling halls of Osaka and Kyoto. So these gambling halls were perfect because there was so much fear of cheating among players. Many refused to use the same decks twice, which meant
Oh,
that Nintendo was now selling up to 50 decks a day to some gambling halls. Just every day they would ship 50 decks to a
dang.
gambling hall
That's a lot of
to
decks.
use. It is. And it's great because now they're making all these sales. And it was so much demand that Yamauchi actually purchased new equipment and ramped up production. And this Nintendo rose from being just another craftsman of cards to the number one Hanafuda card manufacturer in Kyoto, which is pretty big.
Yeah.
And the timing of Yamauchi could not have been even like more perfect. Starting in 1868, Japan was going through a sort of renaissance period called the Meiji era, and some historians actually refer to it as the Meiji Revolution. This is in contrast to the aforementioned Edo period before, of strict isolation from Western culture. Now, Japan is opening up its borders to the people of Europe. Card houses form with Western playing cards, where like visiting Europeans would teach Japanese people how to play cricket or billiards or Western card games. Like we're talking your standard hearts, diamonds, spades, clubs set of playing cards, right?
Yeah. Your what we call standard playing cards.
Yeah, Western playing cards. Also, and the cool thing here is it was kind of like a cultural exchange. So the European people are teaching cricket and cards and billiards, and the Japanese people are teaching Europeans how to play Japanese chess or Go or Mahjong. So this is like kind of a really cool time of cultural sharing back and forth. And as a result of this, Western playing cards and Hanafuda have become a nationwide craze in Japan. And this is what creates those card houses where Yamauchi sells 50 decks of Daitoro cards to a day. Is this cultural exchange is kind of what creates this. So could not
Gotcha.
have been a better case of timing on Yamauchi's part as far as when to start Nintendo. And fun fact that's not important to the story of Nintendo, we'll take a brief aside here, but related. Japanese people at this time do not have a direct translation for playing cards, like Western playing cards, but the word they do pick up on is trump. Like, this is my trump card. So, Western playing cards in Japan are called trump cards.
Okay.
This cultural craze in like Japan started in 1886, 3 years before the founding of the Nintendo company. So again,
And
the
this is all
timing.
unrelated to any political figures in the United States.
It is unrelated, but important because we're going to talk about the importance of trump cards in Japan in just a moment. But to do a quick sum up of what I've just said, Fusajiro Yamauchi can attest his success to not only the quality of his cards, but also his business acumen to start selling the faulty cards at discount prices. And then on top of that, the decision to go into business with card houses and gambling halls in Osaka and Kyoto. That's how he stays afloat and makes his card business so big. And the next move, though, is what truly put him on the map because those trump cards I just mentioned were expensive. They were import items. You had to be imported into Japan from Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, Yamauchi decided to make his own Western trump cards. And he
Brilliant.
bought a Western card printing press, multiple printing presses, and began to make his own made in Japan Western trump cards to make them more affordable for people. And the date of manufacture of this is kind of up in the air. Nintendo's first trump card manufacture date is just unverifiable. Nintendo claims the year 1902, but then that rumor competes with 1904 when Russian prisoners of war needed entertainment in Kyoto and their Japanese guards decided to work with Yamauchi to make them Western style playing cards for entertainment. There's that story. But if this were true, we would have seen marketing materials and we don't see any marketing materials. So then the date before was 1907, but again, this is all speculation. Like even Nintendo said 1907 was the date of their first trump cards, and then they changed it to 1902 in the 90s. That's when they like found more historical documents and changed the date. So who really knows? I think it's just safe to say the first decade of the 1900s is when Nintendo started making Western trump cards. If you're looking for a date, if you're
Okay.
filling out your timeline at home, that's what you should
Yeah.
put.
I've been handwriting my timeline out, and I keep erasing it every time you say a different date. So
I
just
know
first
it's
decade.
it's hard. This book is really good, but it just shows how much research they had to dig into to find all the little pieces of what's happening because there are so many things, which is why that date of when the shop opened is so amazing to me that they have that date, but they don't have the date of the first time they made trump cards.
Yeah, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So once again, though, talking again about timing, it could not have been better because turns out Fujisaru Yamauchi was the only Japanese company that Nintendo was the only Japanese country producing Western trump cards at this time. And these cards were so much more profitable than Hanafuda cards.
Is it because they sold better or because they were easier to make?
So much cheaper to make. They're just
Okay.
paper, like so much
Gotcha.
cheaper to make. And at this time, Japan and Russia were at war. As I mentioned, there were Russian prisoners of war in Kyoto at the time. And that caused massive taxes and inflation in Japan. and there was a tax on games specifically called the Karuta-zei tax. And an estimated 5,000 craftsmen lost their jobs in the Kansai district of Kyoto, and only the strongest survived. One of those being Fujisaru Yamauchi and Nintendo, because of essentially his monopoly on Japanese manufactured trump cards. That's what caused Nintendo to stay afloat during this time, whereas all the other
Wow.
companies failed. So I think it's time to take a like I already kind of mentioned it before, but this is like craftsmen. Game makers were craftsmen at the time. It's a small niche operation in which you would craft cards and you would sell it at another person's shop. You'd be like, "Hey, I crafted these cards. Can I put it in your shop?" You sell them, and then I get a little bit of money back. That's how the business worked. This is all about to change because remember before when you asked me about nationally distributing cards and I was like, wait, it's just Kyoto and Osaka.
Hmm.
This is why. So this change is thanks to Fujisaru Yamauchi's idea to team up with another brand that is nationally distributed at this time. And history buffs probably could have guessed this. It was tobacco, because it turns out in Japan in the early 20th century, the only goods distributed on a national scale were medicine and tobacco. So
Okay.
Fujisaru Yamauchi decided to team up with Nihon Senbai, which was a distribution company that would later be renamed to Japan Tobacco. And now customers could buy cigars and a deck of playing cards right next to it on the same space.
I feel like gambling and smoking really go together, and I don't know, what the chicken and egg problem is there, but maybe that's because of something like this, where like they were sort of distributed together, so of course people did it, or maybe they're distributed together because people love smoking and gambling and drinking at the same time. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
throwing out dots, and you
I
can
don't
connect
know.
them.
It's hard because it's funny too when you think about it, because I know baseball cards in America have a lot to thank for the tobacco industry
Mm-hmm.
because they distributed baseball cards that way as well. You'd buy a pack of cigarettes and have a baseball card inside.
Mm-hmm.
But this was more of a we sell cigars. We drop off a box of cigars to your shop and a box of playing cards from Nintendo. And that's kind of how we sell things. It seems like they used their distribution network and kind of teamed up for this situation.
Gotcha. So maybe they're unrelated. It's just this is what happened to be like convenient, I guess.
Yeah, because otherwise he'd be selling his cards with medicine, and that didn't really make sense. Whereas tobacco is a luxury good, and I feel like
Sure.
cards, I mean, we all love games on this podcast, but they're a luxury good. So that would
Sure.
be something that would go with them. So
Mm-hmm.
all right, so this was a big jump. Now Nintendo's on a national scale, and very quickly Fujisaru Yamauchi and Nintendo became the biggest playing card company in Japan. No one was even close. By the end of the 1920s, with a successful business, the only thing that Fujisaru Yamauchi needed was a successor.
Oh, there's a whole TV show on HBO about this.
There is. It's totally true. And because Yamauchi had no male heir to take over his company, he decided to do the next best thing, which is marry his daughter off to one of his most loyal employees, Sekirio Kaneda. And Sekirio Kaneda married Fujisaru Yamauchi's daughter, which is unfortunate because they don't give her name in the book. They give the name of other wives that were like daughters that were married, but for some reason we don't have her name, and I kind of
Huh.
noticed that, and I was like, that's odd.
That's
But
interesting. Yeah, that's like it seems like almost as a technicality of like, well, I don't have a male heir because obviously this period of time required like a male heir, right? Um, so I'll just marry one of my daughters to a man that I trust to take over this thing. Like, don't pass it down to your daughter, pass it down to the man your daughter married, which is
exactly. I mean,
obviously is like very weird today, but makes sense
yeah.
back then, I guess.
And because of this, Sekirio took the name Yamauchi in 1929. So
Oh,
that's where we're
okay.
kind of at. We're in the 1920s now. 1929, he then became the second managing director of Nintendo, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Sekirio Yamauchi doesn't really have a lot about him in the book. Maybe there's two paragraphs, but I do think he's really important to note. Like he made Nintendo very big, and he made some very good changes at Nintendo. He created a kids line of Karuta for educational purposes, and his cards won awards and were known for how beautiful they were. The art was really good. Everyone loved the cards, and they were used in important events. They would always get the nice Nintendo cards.
Cool. That's a good
Yeah.
place to be in, where your cards are the nice ones.
Exactly. And Sekirio Yamauchi also did a big expansion and he bought the original, what it was now considered the original headquarters. So they had that little shack in Kyoto, right? And then they bought the property next door, which is a very rare for Japan stone building with a metal frame. And this became the Nintendo headquarters for a while. And it's actually a pretty famous building right now. If you go there on, I found this out on Atlas Obscura. It's actually a hotel, and it's got plaques on it saying this was the original Nintendo headquarters. And you can stay in the hotel. You can stay a
That's
night.
cool.
The original Nintendo hotel, which is kind of cool.
Where's that? Which city is that in?
It's in Kyoto.
Okay.
Yeah. So, like Fujisaru Yamauchi, though, Sakirio found himself without a male heir to take over the company. So he married his daughter, Kimi, we have her name, Kimi, to the son of a Nintendo artist named Shinkanojo Inaba. This is the name that I didn't have Matt help me out with. And now I want Matt to give me a rating on how well I did.
Yeah, and I want to make an alternative. I don't know about Shin Kanojo, but I think it's Inaba.
Inaba? Okay,
Inaba.
it could be.
I think so. With my Persona 5 knowledge, I think it's Inaba.
Matt sent me a little cheat sheet with like how you pronounce the vowels. You're right. It is Inaba. That's correct.
Okay.
Shinkanojo Inaba. And like Sakirio, Shinkanojo's last name was then changed to Yamauchi, so I don't have to pronounce Inaba wrong again, which is good.
Good.
And in the book, they use the term against his will.
Oh, like they was sort of forced on him to change his name so they could keep the same name running the company.
Yeah, and I think what they're inferring here is that Shinkanojo Yamauchi had no choice but to become the heir to Nintendo due to this arranged marriage, because it in the book is translated from French, like I said, so I could be missing some in phrasing here, but this is going to make a lot of sense in a second. Okay, so this is pretty big now because Nintendo is in a good spot, and Sakurio Yamauchi is in high spirits because Shinkanojo and Kimi had a son named Hiroshi Yamauchi.
I recognize this name.
That's the name we all know, right? This is his Shinkanojo and Kimi are Hiroshi Yamauchi's parents. This means that after 3 generations, the Nintendo company will finally have a rightful heir. This sounds like Game of Thrones, I realize.
Yeah, it really does.
But by rightful heir, I mean in the traditional sense, like I had a son and now the son takes over the company.
Rightful heir for the standards of the time. Of course,
exactly.
Today this would be
Obviously,
very strange. I don't know how it is in Japan today, but at least in the U.S. today, this would be a very strange way to go about handing out company.
Yeah,
companies.
Then we'd be getting into the whole like generational wealth issue, and I don't want to get into that on a gaming podcast. So
sure.
But not only that, Yamauchi Nintendo Company was the strongest it had ever been. Everything's coming up Millhouse, as they say. All right, this is great for Nintendo, and unfortunately, just like when it sounds like something is too good to be true, in Nintendo's case, it usually is. There is not a lot in the book as to why this happened. I'm sure there's speculation, and it's kind of the same reasoning as Kalinsky's family drama, which we didn't really care about in the other book.
In Console Wars.
But I feel like it's important to mention because this is going to completely shape Hiroshi Yamauchi's life. Is after Hiroshi Yamauchi was born, his father, Shinkanojo, completely abandoned the family. He left the company and disappeared. The family told Hiroshi Yamauchi his dad was sent to Manchuria in China by the Japanese government because in the 1930s, this was a time of Japanese colonialism to kind of like cover it.
Okay.
However, that was a lie. In reality, Shinkanojo Yamauchi would be considered a disgrace to his family, and he just left and abandoned them.
So is he a disgrace and that's why he left, or was he a disgrace because he left?
He was a disgrace because he abandoned everything. He dropped his family and he disappeared. And he did eventually reunite or attempt to reunite with Hiroshi Yamauchi in 1974. That would be 40 years later. And it was because he was in bad health. And initially, Hiroshi Yamauchi refused to meet him. It wasn't until his 3rd letter saying that meeting Hiroshi Yamauchi, his son, was the, quote, last request of a dying man.
Sheesh.
Yeah, so it gets kind of dark here, but not having a father figure is going to completely shape Hiroshi Yamauchi's life, most certainly. And we'll get back to it like when we talk about more pre-video game Nintendo, but this just seemed like a good point to stop here because we've kind of done the really early part, and I feel like Hiroshi Yamauchi needs a whole episode.
Yeah, we're starting to get into modern Nintendo, even if they haven't made video games yet. Hiroshi Yamauchi, I think, is at least the gateway to modern Nintendo.
Yeah, and essentially he's just he's now a little kid, and we're going to talk about his upbringing. And from what I've read, the little pieces of it, it's going to be really interesting because he essentially grew up an only child that he could do anything he wanted. It sounds like so. We're going to
Oh,
get into his young, crazy, wild days, according to this book.
okay. I'm excited.
Yeah, and also if you like this kind of thing, let us know because we're kind of taking a chance here. This is not really, I mean, it's video game adjacent because it's Nintendo, but we talked about no video games at all this episode.
Mm-hmm.
So if you like this, let us know. If you don't like it, let us know. And Tyler, what you been playing? And is it Hanafuda cards? Is it Koi Koi?
This week, I have not been playing any Hanafuda card games, but now you kind of got me wanting to try some of this out. So maybe there's a way we can play online or something. That would be
We
really
should look
fun.
that up together. I would love. We could put out a little YouTube video of us playing
Yeah.
Hanafuda together.
Yeah, let's play some Hanafuda. But in terms of video games that I've been playing, I'm really trying to put the finishing touches on Crisis Core Reunion. I'm on the second to last chapter. I think it's mainly boss fights from here on out in typical JRPG fashion. I'm gonna fight probably a boss, and then I'm gonna fight the boss, but in God form, and then it'll be it's like when the health bar starts filling back up and the music changes to a sped up version of their main theme and the lyrics are in Latin. Like that's what's going to happen. I can tell already. And I have played this game before, so I already sort of know. But that was 15 years ago, so I don't really remember. So yeah, I'm excited to play Crisis Core, to finish Crisis Core. Also, when I finished Crisis Core back in the day, 15 years ago, I actually, and I'm ashamed, Mike, I'm going to admit this to you. I used cheats on the final boss because I had a hacked PSP that had like cheats that I could, like turn on infinite health and stuff like that. So I actually never really finished Crisis Core because I never beat the final boss legitimately.
Oh, so you're trying to just this is your retribution
Yeah. So
angle.
I'm really trying to bring that back. After that, I'm gonna I think put some more time into Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories for the Game Boy Advance on my cool little Game Boy emulator. I also spent a lot of time setting up my 3DS to have all the 3DS games I'm not going to play on it, as well as DS games I'm not going to play on it, and a bunch of Game Boy and like virtual console games that I'm not going to play on it. But I have a lot of fun setting up these things. I feel like because the eShop is closed on the Wii U and the 3DS now, that like it's okay for me to load this thing up with a lot of games that I have definitely purchased and paid for, of course, but
Totally legal.
totally legal. But I feel more vindicated in the hacking of this system to load games onto it. So I've been spending a lot of time on that, and then I think the game I'm going to play on 3DS. Either while I play Birth by Sleep or not Birth by Sleep, Chain of Memories, or maybe after I finish it. I really want to play Metal Gear Solid 3D on the 3DS, which is a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3, but for the 3DS. It's like the only version of Metal Gear Solid 3 I've never played, so I'm very excited to play that on my 3DS. But other than that, that's kind of it. I haven't really been playing a lot of Destiny this week. I do want to get back into Final Fantasy 14 still. I keep saying that. It gets closer and closer. I'll get there. I haven't really played any WoW. Yeah, that's kind of it. What have you been playing, Mike?
Well, first, I should mention this, by the way. I forgot to mention this in the episode. If you want to play Hanafuda cards, like Koi Koi and other versions of those games, Yakuza, the game series, has gambling halls where you can play those games.
I want to play those games. I can tell they have a really cool storyline.
Yeah, my
There's a
friend
lot of them.
Lisa was telling me about them, and she's a streamer and she plays them all on stream, and they sound really fun. And apparently, a lot of them are on Game Pass.
Yeah. And like the earlier ones have remakes too. So like you don't even have to go back to like play like prehistoric PS2 games. You can play
Yeah,
like the remakes.
yeah. See, that sounds really cool. But what I've been playing most of this week is Dredge. I bought Dredge on Steam, the fishing horror game that just came out, and I'm obsessed. I'm obsessed with it. It's my favorite thing. I'm loving it so much.
I love to hear that. I love that for you, Mike.
I've not been into a game like this in a very long time, and I think I'm almost done with it because it's not a very long game. And yeah, just the switch between patiently fishing and then you're being chased by a giant anglerfish monster is just perfect. Seamless, if you will. And then when night falls, you like hallucinate and crazy stuff happens and you upgrade your boat. It feels like I'm in Lovecraft Jaws and I
Love
love
it.
it. I'm into it. So it's pretty much the thing that I've been playing the most. I've also kind of fallen off Destiny a little bit too. Mostly because I beat the story and the story season was really short.
Yeah.
I kind of don't care.
My thing with Destiny right now is the power grind. They seem to be at like a transition period where I think that what they want to do is get rid of power levels in the game. That's what I think they want to do because of the way all of the things that you can do right now are set up in a way that that sort of make power level irrelevant, especially like once you reach the power level you need to be to do the thing, you can't really over level it, or they purposely set you down levels to make it harder, which I don't have a problem with in like inherently of like, hey, we want this thing to be hard, so we're going to make it hard for you. That's not a problem. The problem for me is where it becomes like, okay, but you need to grind to this specific power level just so that we can set your power level down so that it's actually hard for you. And like kind of the fantasy of powering up is that you get to out level things to make it easier later when when you go back to an old dungeon in WoW and you just one shot old raid bosses because you're so much more powerful now. Things that took 40 people to kill 15 years ago take one person a single ability to kill now, and like that's kind of fun, right? But Destiny doesn't seem to want to do that. They want everything to be a specific difficulty when you play it. And so for that reason, it seems like power levels are irrelevant from a power perspective, or from like an in-game like narrative perspective. Like gaining power levels doesn't actually do anything for you. It just sort of unlocks the next tier of content. So it seems like they want to get rid of power levels, but they don't want to get rid of the thing that makes you grind, right? The things that makes you come back every single day because like I need to be a certain level before I can do Grandmaster Nightfalls. And so I'm going to grind this power level until I am strong enough to do master level Nightfalls or Grandmaster level Nightfalls. Now it feels like I'm going to grind this power level because it's an arbitrary grind gate that they have made me do, because the difficulty of the Grandmaster Nightfall doesn't change based on what my power level is. I just unlock the ability to do it after I've put in a certain amount of time to get my power level up. And like that starts, like once you see that, it starts to feel kind of bad, especially when every season they take all the old stuff you used to be able to do, all of the Grandmaster Nightfalls you were just doing. Now it's like, okay, but put in like 20, 30 hours for me of grinding before you can
Yeah.
do it again. The same thing you were doing at the same difficulty you were doing 2 weeks ago. Now you need to put time in again. And like once you start to like see the matrix there, that starts to feel pretty bad. So I'm like, just make the call. If you want to make it so power levels are irrelevant, then take them out of the game and let me play whatever I want. And if it's really hard, that's fine. Or make power levels relevant and make it so I can out level something, right? Like make me feel like I'm getting more powerful when my number goes up, not just unlocking more content to play that I've already played. That's the other thing. It's the content I've already played.
Yeah, I agree with that fully. It's just not as much fun. I was kind of having a good time playing Lost Sectors because like a challenge, but then
Mm-hmm.
once you kind of do that, you're like, what am I doing here? There's other games to play. You know, this is just
Yeah, exactly.
grindiness for
Exactly.
for the sake of grindiness, and I don't need that in my life right now.
Yeah, and the game is fun. Like shooting stuff is always fun, but like at a certain point, you start to, like I said, see the matrix, and then you go, "Oh, I see the like strings that are being pulled here," and I'd rather spend my time on something else where I don't see those strings.
Did we mention that we beat the raid though? Did we tell people that?
I don't know if we did, but we did beat the raid in the first week, and we got our jackets, or we ordered our jackets.
We got our jackets, yeah. Also, fun fact, if you order the Hanafuda cards from Amazon, like the official Nintendo ones, the other issue I had with learning the game is the instructions are entirely in Japanese.
That makes it difficult.
That makes it difficult. You know, maybe I should just send a PDF of this to Matt and he could just tell me how to play the game
Time to boot up Duolingo and
and just go
let's
for it.
let's learn some Japanese. That's what I'm doing now because I might be going to Japan in a month or so
Ooh, that's
for
exciting
work.
though.
So I'm like trying to make sure that I learn stuff. I've been to a couple of different countries now where I didn't take the time to learn any of the language before I got there, and I really heavily regretted it. So I'm like trying to get ahead of that this
I
time.
feel bad about that too. I always think about that when I travel internationally because so many people in other countries speak English.
Yeah.
It's like super helpful. And it almost feels like an act of kindness, of like respect, just to try to learn
Yep.
basic phrases, you know,
I
because I remember
agree.
being in France as an 18-year-old on like a senior trip trying to order ice cream in French, and I tried so hard, and the guy just was like, "It's okay, I can help you out." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're the best. Thank you so much." Started
Yeah.
speaking English really. my terrible French followed up by his perfect English.
Yeah, and it's the thing that like so when you're in the airport, it like because I've been to recently in the past like year or so, I've been to like Korea and I've been to China, and like when you're in the airport, the signs are in Korean or Chinese and English, right? And when you're in a big city, like you can sort of generally like most things have sort of like an English thing there, which is great. But it starts to make me think like, well, what if I was from Spain and only knew Spanish and I went to China? That English is not helping me, right? Like the Chinese obviously isn't helping me and the English isn't helping me. And it just makes me feel like, gosh, as an American who only knows English, like the world really caters to me in a way that makes me kind of feel like it shouldn't. And I should probably take the time to like learn how to be in another country, right? Like the way that they do. Like
Yeah.
when a Japanese person comes to LAX, there's no signs in Japanese, right?
Yeah.
Like they just have to figure it out. And like maybe they know enough English because it's like sort of prevalent around the world that like maybe they know enough English to be able to get around. But I don't know enough Japanese to even begin to get around if everything was only in Japanese and there was nobody there who could speak English. And I'm like, man, I should really just learn a little bit of the language, right? Enough to like talk to a taxi driver or something, right?
100%. Yeah. That's our life advice this episode.
Yeah.
Unwarranted life advice. Learn the language if you travel somewhere.
Yeah. Or at least enough of it to show that you tried, right?
Yeah. Not learn the language. Learn basic phrases so you can at least navigate your way back to the airport.
And figure out how to pay for stuff. In China,
Oh
it's very hard to
yeah.
pay for things if you don't have a WeChat account with a payment method hooked up to it. And that's very hard to do if you're American for reasons. But like we got into a taxi and we could not pay our bill in that taxi. And we needed to have a friend of ours from China bail us out several times. And that felt really bad. So learn how to
Oh
pay for
yeah.
stuff wherever you're going.
Yeah. That's rough. Well, let us know if you're interested in more of these episodes. We're not going to do emails today because I feel like we should just let the emails mount up and then do another mailbag in a couple weeks. We haven't done one of those in a while. So
Yeah.
we're probably going to do that. So send us your emails. You can do that at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to codexpodcast.net and send us an email through there. You can join our Discord, follow Tyler and I on Twitter, check out our Trello boards and our piles of shame.
I am keeping my Trello board up to date. I just checked off the next mission in Crisis Core that I finished earlier today.
Nice. So. Yeah, I put Dredge on there and I move my The Witcher over now that I beat it. But then I made separate cards for the DLCs because I felt like they're just so big. They kind of count
they're
as
their
own
own
game.
games. Yeah.
Yeah. But other than that, I think that's going to be it for the day. Tyler, do you want to say bye to everybody?
Goodbye, everybody.